Hi, listeners. I'm Colleen Dieter, landscape consultant and certified arborist at ATXGardens.com. Welcome to the ATX Gardens Podcast, where every other week I share simple, timely tips for what to do in your Central Texas garden right now. If you're watching on YouTube, tap like and subscribe for more gardening help. Well, hey there, gardening friends. Today, we're talking about what to do in the first half of March, which is one of the busiest times for gardeners in Austin. As always, this episode is sponsored by ATXGardens.com, my landscape consulting business. And there's a lot to talk about, so let's jump in. In general, March 1st is the last average freeze in Austin, in town. So a lot is happening in the garden as a result of that. Simply put, spring is here. And with the changing of the seasons, the gardening tasks that we undertake change as well. This time of year, it's called spring because everything happens really fast and the plants start growing, especially the weeds. So make sure you're keeping tabs on all of the cool season weeds like sticky weed, hedge parsley, rescue grass, clover burrs, grass burrs, and false dandelions. And at this time of year, you might also see warm season weeds starting to grow, like Bermuda grass and Johnson grass, because the weather has been really warm lately. Those warm season weeds are starting to get a head start. So make sure you've got a hoe, digging forks, the Fiskars uproot weeder, and your Japanese handy weeders to stay on top of all of them. They're much easier to remove when they're small. So now they're starting to become more and more visible. So start looking for those weeds and see the show notes for links to all of those tools that you can use for removing weeds. You know, something I tell my customers all the time is that it's important to learn to identify the plants in your yard rather than thinking that everything that you didn't plant is a weed. Getting to know those little volunteer plants can be really helpful because they might not actually be weeds. There are a lot of native beneficial plants that you'd be better off getting to know and keeping them rather than wasting time removing them, like our native horse herb, sedges, and dichondra. So get to know the plants that are sprouting up in your yard and decide if those really are truly a weed to you or not. You get to decide what's a weed and what isn't. For example, at my house, I keep dandelions, true dandelions. I really like them a lot. I eat them. I love the flowers. But there are dandelion lookalikes, like a plant called false dandelion, that I don't like, that I remove because it's not edible and it's kind of ugly. So you get to decide which ones you want to keep. But there's not enough hours in the day to pull every plant that volunteers in your yard. So get to know which ones you might want to keep. If you've been keeping plants indoors or in a greenhouse all winter to protect them from freezes, now's the time to start making plans and watching the forecast. If the long-range forecast looks okay to you and there's no freezing weather in the forecast, you can start bringing your plants outside. It's important to remember that March 1st is the last average frost in town in Austin. It's not the latest possible frost that we could have, and we often get freezes well into March. So just be aware, you may want to wait a little bit longer in case there's another freeze, but it's becoming less and less likely every day after March 1st that there'll be another freeze. And if it's really hot, if you have a greenhouse and it's getting really hot in the greenhouse, it may be time to bring those plants out. Now, as of this recording, which is recorded a, a week or a few days before it's actually released, we have not had much rain, and there isn't much rain in the forecast. So don't forget to water any pots that you have. They're going to need water now that the temperatures are getting warmer. The sun is at a higher angle in the sky. The sun's going to start becoming more intense. So you're going to need to water your pots a little bit more often. And any plants that you've planted in the last year that are still getting established, they're going to start needing more water now too. Since it hasn't rained, they're still trying to get established in their new home and they're going to need some water. So make sure that you don't forget. That's key at this time of year. Now, moving on to the woody plants, the trees and shrubs, what's going on with them in the first 2 weeks of March? So, you may have noticed that a lot of landscapers and gardeners cut the tops off of their crepe myrtle trees in February and March. That is an old conventional practice that's not necessary and is bad for the trees. The only time I cut the tops off of crepe myrtles is if they're rubbing on a taller and more valuable tree like an oak. Uh, and sometimes removing the crepe myrtle is the only option for preventing it from rubbing on its neighbors. And if you'd rather not remove the crepe myrtle and it's rubbing on a more valuable tree like an oak and it's creating open wounds on both trees, that's a real problem. And if you don't want to completely remove a crepe myrtle where you have that problem, then in that case, you can cut the top off of it. But that's really the last resort. A lot of landscapers call that crepe murder, and it's a funny pun, and it is, really bad for the trees, so try to avoid doing that. It's a really good time now to plant Mediterranean trees like figs, pomegranates, and bay laurels. You can also plant tropical shrubs and trees like loquats and bougainvilleas. South Texas native trees like anacawas and Mexican olives are really good planted at this time of year too. Now, I feel that it's getting a little too late to plant other woody plants like shade trees like oaks and pecans and other woody plants like roses and hollies. If you don't already have those types of plants in hand, do not acquire more of them. If possible, wait until September for planting things like oaks, pecans, roses, and hollies. If you already have them, someone's given them to you, or you've purchased them, get them in the ground now as soon as possible. They definitely need to be planted by April 1st. That way they can start to try to get established before it gets really hot outside. Do not prune any trees right now. Do not prune your oak trees in particular because it is oak wilt season now, and pruning oak trees now can spread oak wilt. So avoid pruning now, wait until summer. And really, it's not a good time to prune any trees. It's really hard on them right now to be trimmed in the spring when they're growing new leaves. Wait until summer to do any tree pruning unless you have a branch that's dangerous, it's broken, it's going to fall off, or maybe you keep walking into it, it's blocking a walkway or something like that. Wait until summer to do all your other tree pruning. Now is a good time to trim evergreen shrubs like Burford hollies, Texas sage, dwarf yaupons, boxwoods, abelias, those types of things. Many of my customers ask me about shrubs that they have planted in front of windows. It's a really common problem that hedges and shrubs that are planted in front of windows grow up to be too tall. And you need to reduce their height so that they don't look overgrown and block the windows. So I recommend trimming them really hard right now. That way, they'll grow right back in the next few weeks in the spring. They'll grow back into that spot. So keep in mind when you trim them, if you're trying to control their height, you need to take them down even lower than the point where you want them to grow to. Okay, because you're going to trim them and then they're going to grow right back. So if you want them to grow to the windowsill and be that height, you need to take them even lower than the windowsill so they will grow up to that height. So sometimes you can look at the stems and you can tell how much growth the shrub had last year. If you look at the twigs and the end of the twig, you can sometimes see where the twig is skinnier than the branch that it's growing off of. And that can give you some idea of how much the shrub grew last year if you didn't trim it. If you trimmed it, then you can't tell. But if you didn't trim it at all last year, you can kind of tell how much new growth there was last year by looking at the twigs. And then you can cut the shrubs down lower than that amount, right? So let's say the shrub grew 6 inches in height last year. You would cut the shrubs at least 6 inches below the windowsill so that you know in 1 year they're going to grow about 6 inches. So think about that, okay? And it's much better to cut them really hard one time a year. And this is a good time to do it because they're going to grow right back. So it's not going to look weird for a long time. Cut them really hard at this time of year one time rather than shearing them over and over and over again to keep them short. It's better for the health of the plant. Now, what's going on with our fruit trees in our landscapes in the first half of March? There's a lot going on with them right now. The peaches, pears, apples, and plums, and your nectarines, they are all either blooming or finishing up blooming right now. And when about 75% of the petals have fallen off of the tree, it's time to start looking for baby fruits, and it's time to spray with an organic insecticide like Take Down Garden Spray, which is pyrethrin and oil mixed together. Or you can cover whole trees or individual fruits with micro mesh or something called an orchard sock, which is like a little mesh bag that goes over the little fruits. And you can do either one. Either you can spray or you can cover. And that helps prevent maggots and like plum curculios from infesting your apples, pears, peaches, plums. So all those little maggots. Their eggs get laid at this time of year, so you have to do something to prevent that. It's really important if you're going to spray with an insecticide, make sure you spray in the evening when bees and other pollinators are less active to avoid killing them because they will still be visiting the flowers while the trees are wrapping up blooming. So it's really important to get that right. I prefer covering. I use orchard socks on mine because I don't want to harm the pollinators by spraying, but it's a lot of work to cover. Now, if you planted your fruit trees, peaches, pears, plums, nectarines, apples, if you planted them less than 3 years ago, it's really important to monitor the trees and remove all of their fruits. If they were planted or transplanted less than 3 years ago, they need to use all of the carbohydrates that they're making to get their roots established. And making fruits and seeds requires a lot of carbohydrates. And you want the tree to put all of its efforts, all of its energy into getting established in its new home. So it's really important in the first 3 years to remove any tiny fruits from the tree, and it will help ensure that your tree has more fruit and is a lot healthier as it matures. I know it's a real bummer. Everyone gets sad about that, but it's really important for the health of the tree to not allow it to produce any fruit in the first 3 years after it's been planted. And then in the next episode, I'll talk more in depth about citrus trees and how to care for them in mid-March, because that's time for pruning and feeding citrus trees. March is time for grafting, around the time when Texas mountain laurels are in full bloom or right after. And I'll talk a little bit more about grafting in the next episode too. Central Texas Seed Savers has a Fruit Savers program, and we have some grafting workshops coming up, and I'll give you more information about that in future episodes. Okay, and now it's time for our mid-episode sponsor break. Hey y'all, this is Colleen from ATXGardens.com. If you want personalized help with your landscape, book a consultation, and we'll walk your yard together, answer all of your questions, and create a plan for you that feels doable. Today, I worked with some new homeowners who inherited a yard from an avid gardener. It was clear that the former homeowner loved native plants and pollinators and loved gardening. The new owners don't love gardening as much, and they needed some interpretation of the yard. They weren't sure what plants were what. They couldn't tell what was a weed from a plant that was planted on purpose. And I went and I helped give them some interpretation and made the landscape more legible to them. I helped them figure out which plants they wanted to keep, which ones they could take out, and ways to improve the landscape so that it was a better fit for them. I think that with their newfound confidence after our consultation, I might make gardeners out of them yet. So if you're a new homeowner, you know someone who's a new homeowner, you can always give a consultation as a gift as well. So check out ATXGardens.com. And let's get back to the episode. So springtime is super exciting for perennials and bulbs and grasses. There's a lot to do. It's really important to finish cutting off all of the dead tops on the perennials, the tops of the plants that died in the winter. You've got to cut that dead part off on the top. Do it now if you haven't finished it yet, because now they're actively growing back. They're springing into action, and it's going to get harder and harder to remove the dead stems when the new growth is emerging. It's really important as you're trimming off the dead stems to avoid cutting the new growth as much as possible. Now's a good time to cut the tops off of ornamental grasses like inland sea oats, switchgrass, miscanthus, and Indian grass. Basically, any of the ornamental grasses that are not evergreen. Just remove the top half of the plant and leave the bottom half alone. Do not cut them lower than halfway because that can kill them. The bottom of the plant on the ornamental grasses has special cells in them that allow the grasses to grow back. They grow from the bottom up, which is different from most plants. Most plants grow from the ends out, but with the grasses, they grow from the bottom up. And if you cut off the bottom of the plant, they can't grow back. They will struggle to grow back. And I see that happening all over town. People cut the grasses way too low, and then they look terrible, and they sometimes don't grow back. They look really bad, or they'll grow back maybe halfway. Now, we have a lot of muley grasses in our landscapes in Austin, the big muley and the Gulf muley. Those plants are more evergreen than the other grasses, and they don't do great when they're cut down. They don't recover very well compared to the other species where the whole top of the plant dies in the winter. They're mostly evergreen. So, with those plants, with the muleys, especially Gulf muleys, use a rake and break method instead. Okay, so you'll get a little rake and get in there with the rake and try to rake out any tree leaves and any dead grass leaves that are in there. And then just use your hands to snap off the dead flower stems that have faded. And that's all you need to do. I have a really good recommendation for an adjustable rake, and there will be a link to that in my show notes. I am an Amazon affiliate, and I receive commissions for anything that you purchase through one of my links. And those little adjustable rakes are so helpful, really, really handy. If any of your ornamental grasses have rotten sections in them, or sometimes they get holes in the center, there'll be like a big dead section in the middle of the plant. That means it's time to dig them up and divide them and then replant them. So you can use a border spade or a digging fork to dig them out. And there'll be links to those in the show notes. After you dig the plant out, cut vertically through the entire plant, through the top of the plant, all the way down through the root ball with an old pruning saw. And then you can replant each chunk and you can remove all that dead stuff. They'll be a lot more attractive, and it's like having new plants. Okay, like I said in the last episode, now is still a good time to cut down evergreen herbaceous plants like cast irons, monkey grasses or liriopes, sedges, bicolor irises, Asian jasmines, and holly ferns if they have cold damage or they just look kind of ratty and old. If they look good, just leave them alone. Now is a great time, maybe the best time, to plant and transplant all perennials, grasses, bulbs, cacti, succulents, and ground covers. So get to it. I know that a lot of this info is pretty confusing, so keep in mind if you need help, you can book a consultation with me at ATXGardens.com. Okay, now on to the vegetable and herb garden. This is a very busy time for the vegetable garden. Make sure if you're getting ready to plant new stuff that you add some compost to the garden, maybe add a little bit of vegetable food for your warm season veggies. Make sure you've got some mulch on hand. Some tree leaves make great mulch. You can use the parts that you cut off of your ornamental grasses as mulch in the vegetable garden. Now is the time of year where we're moving away from our cool season veggies to warm season veggies. So now's the time to really start harvesting your cool season vegetables. Take those in, eat them up, freeze them, canning, whatever you do with your cool season veggies. Start pulling them out, start eating them up here in the whole month of March. There's still time if you want to plant radishes and mustard from seed. They're still okay to plant now because they grow so fast. They'll mature and you can harvest them before it gets too hot for them. But it's really too late for all of the other cool season crops. You can still plant strawberries and Swiss chard from transplants now because they're more heat tolerant than most of the other cool season crops. Warm season crops that you have been growing from seed indoors can now be planted outside, like tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers. Just be ready with some covers just in case we get one more cold spell. Really, for those guys, if it gets below 30, 40, or 35 degrees at night, you probably want to cover them because they're very cold sensitive. You can also get those plants from the nurseries now or from friends who've been growing them and start planting them outdoors. You just want to make sure that you can keep them warm if temperatures dip down into the 30s. All kinds of beans, corn, cucumbers, summer squash, and warm season greens like New Zealand spinach and magenta spreen can be planted directly into the ground from seed now. I'm getting really excited. I need to finish setting up my soaker hose system for my vegetable garden, and I also have some hoops with chicken wire that I've put over the vegetable beds to protect them from animals that have been digging. I had raccoons and armadillos and foxes and possums and all kinds of critters digging in my vegetable beds. So before I plant anything, I'm going to finish the watering system and finish my animal protection. Once I get that done, I'll be putting all those warm season greens in the ground and the cucumbers and beans I love so much. Okay, now it's also a great time for planting all of the warm season herbs from transplants. So that's rosemary, oregano, thyme, lavender, lemon balm, catnip, lemongrass, mint, all those guys. It's a great time to plant right now. Chives, it's a good time. But you have to have little plants and start with little plants. So you'll need to get those from friends or from the nursery. Basil can be planted now either from plants or from seeds, and you can put the seeds directly into the garden. Next episode, I will talk a lot about lawn care. So, next episode is going to be a lot about the first mowing of the season and what to do with your grass. So, that wraps up today's episode. Check out the show notes for links to everything I mentioned. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a fellow Central Texas gardener because it really helps me to grow the show. I'm Colleen Dieter with ATXGardens.com, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the ATX Gardens Podcast. For show notes, tools, and to book a consultation with me, visit ATXGardens.com. Happy gardening! See you next time.